What if I told you that the greatest playmaker in football history ended his career by headbutting an opponent in the World Cup final? Did you know that there was a man who could orchestrate symphonies with his feet, yet couldn't control the fire burning inside his soul? This is a story of Zinedine Zidane, a genius whose legacy cannot be told without understanding the violence that lived within him. But how did he develop this unique skill of being both an artist and a destroyer? Well, to understand the headbutt that shocked the world, we must first understand the streets that forged a man. Because Zinedine Zidane wasn't just the last true playmaker in football history. He was a walking contradiction, a poet who could write with his feet and fight with his fists. And while the world remembers him for that devastating moment in Berlin, the truth is far more incredible than you could ever imagine. In the concrete jungle of La Castellane, one of Marseille's most notorious housing projects, a silent revolution was taking place. The year was 1980, and while the world focused on glamorous football stadiums, something mind-blowing was happening in the streets where hope seemed impossible. Zinedine Zidane was born into a world where dreams were luxuries most families couldn't afford. His father, Smail, worked as a warehouseman, his callous hands carrying the weight of 5 children's futures. His mother, Malika, cleaned offices at night, scrubbing floors while her son practiced with a tennis ball in their cramped apartment. But this wasn't all. The poverty that surrounded young Zidane wasn't just an obstacle, it was fuel. Because in La Castellane, you learned to fight for everything, even the right to dream. And Zidane? He was fighting with his feet long before he ever used his head. However, there was something different about this quiet boy who rarely spoke but communicated fluently through football. While other kids in the neighborhood played with aggression born from frustration, Zidane played with an elegance that seemed impossible given his surroundings. Yet, beneath that grace, a volcanic temperament was already forming. As Zidane later reflected, the streets taught me everything. Not just football, but how to survive, how to fight, how to never give up. The first scouts who noticed him couldn't believe what they were seeing. Here was a 14-year-old boy from the projects who could control a ball like Pele and had the vision of Platini. But wait until you find out what happened when they tried to sign him. The young Zidane was so shy, so withdrawn, that he barely spoke during his first trials. Coaches wondered if this silent teenager had the mental strength to handle professional football. Little did they know, they were looking at a player whose silence masked an unbelievable determination and a temper that would one day define his legacy. Because while Zidane's feet were learning to create magic, his heart was learning something else entirely. That in a world where respect had to be earned through force, sometimes violence was the only language people understood. The phone rang at ASK on a quiet afternoon in 1989, and Destiny answered. Jean Varad, the club's youth coordinator, had received word about a teenager from Marseille who was supposedly different. However, when 16-year-old Zidane stepped off the train, nobody could have predicted they were witnessing the beginning of a legend. At Caen, Zidane wasn't just learning football. He was discovering himself. But his breakthrough didn't come immediately. For months, he sat on the bench, watching, learning, his dark eyes absorbing every movement on the pitch. Then, on May 20th, 1989, against Nantes, everything changed. The crowd held its breath as this unknown teenager glided across the pitch with supernatural grace. His first touch was velvet, his vision was otherworldly, and his passing was poetry in motion. Yet, even in that debut, something else was visible, a flash of anger when an opponent fouled him too aggressively. Roland Courbis, who later coached Zidane, said, "Even as a teenager, you could see 2 personalities in one body. The artist and the warrior were always fighting inside him. But this happened at the worst possible time. As Zidane's reputation grew, so did the attention from opponents who tried to provoke him. Because word was spreading. This elegant playmaker had a breaking point, and if you found it, you could neutralize France's most promising talent. And while his performances were stunning, averaging 6 goals and 4 assists in his breakthrough season, it was his move to Bordeaux in 1992 that would truly unleash the genius. Yet, would they really be able to handle what came with that genius? At Bordeaux, under coach Roland Courbis, Zidane evolved from promising prospect to devastating playmaker. His passing range became legendary. His first touch became impossible to defend against, and his ability to see passes others couldn't even imagine turned him into French football's crown jewel. However, The red cards were mounting. In one particularly shocking incident against Montpellier, Zidane was sent off for a retaliatory stamp that left spectators horrified. The same feet that could caress a ball with impossible precision could also deliver devastating punishment. Because while the world was falling in love with Zidane the artist, they were about to meet Zidane the destroyer. And once that side of him was unleashed, there would be no going back. Therefore, when Juventus came calling in 1996 with a world record offer of £3.2 million, they thought they were buying the most elegant midfielder in Europe. But could they really handle the volcano they were about to inherit? The black and white stripes of Juventus had never clothed a more complex genius. When Zidane arrived in Turin in 1996, he wasn't just joining Italy's most successful club. He was entering a laboratory where his contradictions would be tested like never before. Under Marcello Lippi's tactical discipline, Zidane found his perfect stage. The Serie A demanded technical perfection, mental toughness, and tactical intelligence. Yet, it also demanded something that would prove to be Zidane's greatest challenge: emotional control. However, the results were initially mind-blowing. In his first season, Zidane orchestrated Juventus to the Champions League final with performances that redefined what a midfielder could accomplish. His pass completion rate of 89% in European competition was unheard of for a creative player, while his ability to dictate tempo made grown defenders weep with frustration. But wait until you find out what happened in those Champions League finals. May 28, 1997, Amsterdam Arena. Borussia Dortmund stood between Zidane and his first European crown. The Frenchman was at his devastating best, threading passes through impossible gaps, creating chances that shouldn't have existed. Yet, when the final whistle blew, Juventus had lost 3-1. The heartbreak was crushing, but worse was to come. Because exactly 1 year later, in the same competition, Real Madrid would deliver an even more devastating blow. The 1998 Champions League final saw Zidane produce another masterclass, only to watch his teammates miss chance after chance in a 1-0 defeat. Alessandro Del Piero later reflected, "Zidane gave us everything in those finals. His passing was perfect, his vision was incredible, but football isn't always fair to genius." And while these defeats broke Zidane's heart, they also began to crack his legendary composure. The red cards that had been occasional outbursts at Bordeaux became a pattern at Juventus. In crucial matches against AC Milan and Inter, Zidane's temper cost his team precious points. Yet, there was method to his madness. Opponents had learned that provoking Zidane wasn't just effective, it was essential. They would whisper insults about his Algerian heritage, grab his shirt, kick his ankles, anything to trigger the explosion that would remove Juventus's most dangerous weapon. But this wasn't all. The pressure of being Juventus's creative hub, combined with the devastating Champions League defeats, was transforming Zidane into something more volatile. The calm genius who had mesmerized Bordeaux was becoming a man whose brilliance and rage existed in perfect, terrifying balance. Therefore, when Florentino Perez called from Real Madrid in 2001 with an offer that would shatter all transfer records, he wasn't just buying the world's best midfielder. He was purchasing a masterpiece that came with its own built-in destruction mechanism. The Santiago Bernabéu had seen legends, but never a €77.5 million work of art. When Zinedine Zidane stepped onto the pristine grass of Real Madrid in July 2001, he wasn't just joining a football club. He was becoming the crown jewel of Florentino Perez's impossible dream. The Galactico project demanded perfection, and Zidane delivered it with shocking consistency. Alongside Ronaldo, Figo, Beckham, and Roberto Carlos, he formed an attacking constellation that redefined what football could look like. But how did he develop this unique ability to make the extraordinary seem effortless? However, it was May 15, 2002, that Zidane produced a moment that would define not just his Real Madrid career, but football itself. The Champions League final at Hampden Park, Real Madrid trailing Bayer Leverkusen, the clock ticking toward disaster. Then, in the 45th minute, Roberto Carlos delivered a cross that seemed impossible to control. The ball hung in the air like a question mark, 18 yards from goal, surrounded by defenders. What happened next was devastating. Zidane's left foot connected with the ball at the perfect moment. sending it screaming into the top corner with such violence and precision that even the Leverkusen goalkeeper could only stand and applaud. The volley didn't just win Real Madrid the Champions League. It created a piece of art that transcended sport. Steve McManaman, who assisted the goal, said, "I've never seen a more perfect strike." The technique was insane, but what made it incredible was the pressure he was under. Only Zidane could score a goal like that in a Champions League final. And while that volley made Zidane a Real Madrid legend, his overall impact was even more mind-blowing. In 5 seasons at the Bernabeu, he won 1 Champions League, 2 La Liga titles, and established himself as the most elegant player ever to wear the white shirt. Yet, the red cards continue to haunt him. Even in Madrid's pristine environment, surrounded by superstars and protected by the best referees, Zidane's temper remained his greatest enemy. Crucial matches against Barcelona, crucial Champions League ties, all marred by moments where the genius lost his mind. Because while Zidane was creating magic on the pitch, he was also creating enemies off it. Opposition players knew exactly how to trigger him. A late challenge, a racial slur, a grab at his shirt at the wrong moment. And when Zidane exploded, Real Madrid's entire system collapsed. Therefore, when France called upon him for the 2006 World Cup, they weren't just asking for his genius. They were gambling that they could control the volcano long enough to win the greatest prize in football. But wait until you find out what happened when that volcano finally erupted on the world's biggest stage. The summer of 1998 belonged to France, but belonged to Zinedine Zidane even more. As the host nation prepared for their World Cup, the pressure on their star midfielder was crushing. However, what happened next would transform Zidane from a talented player into a national deity. But this wasn't all. The opening matches of the tournament saw Zidane struggle with the weight of expectation. Against Saudi Arabia and Denmark, he looked mortal, hesitant, almost afraid of his own shadow. Critics whispered that he couldn't handle the pressure of a home World Cup. Then came the red card against Saudi Arabia that threatened to derail everything. For violent conduct, Zidane was suspended for 2 crucial group stage matches. The genius who was supposed to lead France to glory was watching from the stands, his teammates struggling without their conductor. Yet, sometimes the most devastating weapons become more powerful when they're hidden. Because when Zidane returned for the knockout stages, he wasn't just ready to play. He was ready to rewrite football history. The quarterfinal against Italy showcased everything that made Zidane unstoppable. His passing was surgical, his movement was ghostly, and his ability to control the tempo of the match was simply incredible. France won on penalties, but it was Zidane's performance that convinced the world they were watching something special. However, it was July 12, 1998, that Zidane produced a performance that would define a generation. The World Cup final, France versus Brazil, the defending champions led by Ronaldo, Rivaldo, and Roberto Carlos. The entire world expected Brazil to cruise to victory. But wait until you find out what happened in the opening 45 minutes. The 27th minute, Emmanuel Petit's corner kick hung in the air like a prayer. Zidane rose above the Brazilian defense, his bald head making perfect contact with the ball. The net bulged, the Stade de France exploded, and Brazil's dreams began to crumble. The 45th minute, another corner, another leap, another devastating header. This time, Zidane's technique was so perfect that Brazilian goalkeeper Claudio Taffarel could only watch helplessly as the ball nestled into the bottom corner. Jacquet, France's coach, said, "In that moment, Zidane wasn't just playing football. He was conducting a symphony that the entire world was forced to listen to." The final score, France 3, Brazil 0. But the real story was Zidane's complete domination of the world's best team. His 2 headers didn't just win France their first World Cup. They announced the arrival of a player who could bend reality to his will. And while the celebration lasted for months, Zidane wasn't finished. Euro 2000 beckoned, and with it, another chance to showcase his devastating brilliance. In Belgium and Holland, Zidane reached his absolute peak. His performance against Spain in the quarterfinals was a masterclass in creative destruction, while his golden goal against Italy in the semifinal proved that genius could strike at any moment. Therefore, when France lifted the European Championship trophy, Zidane had achieved something unprecedented. He was the undisputed king of international football, the player every coach feared and every fan worshipped. Yet, with great power came great danger. Because the higher Zidane climbed, the more desperate his opponents became to bring him down. And they were about to discover that the genius had a breaking point.